Let's review Cycle 3 of the Animorphs book series. That includes these books that you see here, number 11 through to number 15, with of course the Andalite Chronicles thrown in. The first two cycles of book averaged out to 8 out of 10 for an overall score. Let's cover the scores now. This is the weakest cycle of the three we've seen so far, but not by much. I've averaged the scores out. If we just take the 5 books into consideration, the average score is 7.8, rounded up to 8, so the other two cycles were 8 as well, but that's the lowest score, because they were 8.2 and 8 point something. But if we add the Andalite Chronicles into that calculation, it averages out to 7.3, rounded down to 7 out of 10. So depending on whether you want to include the side books, it's a 7 or an 8 out of 10 this particular cycle. The best book from this group was number 13, The Change. Clearly, it was a 10 out of 10 book. My favourite of the series. You can probably tell that it's my favourite of the series, hence why that's there. Worst book in the series, in this particular cluster, is The Andalite Chronicles. And if we're talking just these 5, it's number 15, The Escape. What do we see as we go through this particular cycle? The first two cycles are mostly about character development and introducing new characters. So cycle 1 was mostly the character development. Cycle 2, we developed Cassie, who wasn't really developed in the first cycle, and we introduced the Elemist, Eric, and a whole host of other stuff. This cycle is a bit different because we've introduced the main characters. We introduced some more. We've covered the character development, and now we're starting to get into the nitty-gritty of things. The characters we introduce here are the 2 escapee Hawkbajir in book 13, which is Jarhami and Ket Halpak. Apart from the characters in the Andalite Chronicles, of course, we don't really introduce any new characters into the series. The best thing about this cycle of books is that the authors seem to have nailed down these characters. The first 2 cycles, you sort of saw the relationships building between this lot, but in this cycle, particularly the latter 3, 13, 14 and 15, the character interactions are beautifully done. They've nailed these characters now, and I imagine that the quality of the writing between those characters will continue to be at a high standard as we go ahead. If it were down to character interactions, this would be the best cycle. The problem with this cycle is that it's largely filler. 11, 12, 14 can all be considered filler. That's 3 out of the 5 main series books, and that's not something we've seen yet. The 2 first cycles, books 1 through 10, were mostly quite important books. In fact, I'd say they were all important in their own way. Whereas you've got 3 books here that you take out the series and nobody's really going to notice. Another big problem with this cycle of books was plot convenience, tropes. We got a lot of it in this cycle of books, particularly in the Andalite Chronicles and The Escape. The plot convenience. If you want to look at specific examples, go and look at my specific videos for each of these books, but the amount of plot convenience in these books and, oh, you're saved at the last minute trope, it really comes and hits full force here. And I think that's why this series of books scores lower than the previous 2 cycles. Let's talk about best of and worst of. What's the best cover? For all of its flaws, the Andalite Chronicles is clearly the best looking of the bunch. It's a lovely design cover. And even if you take into account the 3-parters, even those 3 separate parts have good artwork. If we're talking just about the 5 main series books, I said that The Escape was the best cover. I like how they've got Marco jumping in and they've got the shark underwater. I quite like that. The worst cover is The Change. You may wonder, why have you got that there? That's because it's my favourite book. That doesn't mean that it's my favourite cover. These are all pretty average for covers, with the possible exception of The Escape. The thing about The Change is, we've already got a front cover of this particular boy morphing to Hawk. We've had that on book 3, so I'm just thinking, well, you could have done more there. You could have had Tobias morphing from Hawk to Hawkbajir. That would have been a much better cover, because we've already had boy morphing to Hawk. We've already had it. Why? Be a bit more adventurous, please. For such an important book, you could have put a bit more... I don't know. Maybe they didn't have a design for the Hawkbajir then. Yeah, that would have been awesome. Hawk to Hawkbajir on the change would have been perfect. Best and worst moment. Let's cover worst moment first. And it's not really a moment. Alaran's Choice, part 2 of the Andalite Chronicles, that whole section. I gave it 2 out of 10 in my review. And I think a lot of people disagree with me, but I went through that book, I reviewed it after I read it, and I gave my reasons for why I thought it was a terrible book. And I tried to think, what's the worst moment in that book? And I just came to the conclusion, the whole bloody thing. Worst moment of this cycle is the whole of Alaran's Choice, part 2 of the Andalite Chronicles. It is just moment after moment of just bad, lazy, awful writing. It really is. And it's unusual because Michael and Kath, I don't know who does the majority of the writing, but it tends to be very well written. Part of the reason why I like it. Of course, you've got the plot inconsistencies and whatever, but you got to take into consideration that this is a kid's book and you're not going to get, like, well thought out theses on what's going on. That's theses, by the way. What is the best moment? My favourite moment of this series, of course, is going to come from 13 The Change, and it's the part where Ket Halpak is explaining to Tobias what Hawkbajir blades are for. There's so many little messages packed into that little segment of that book, and I think it's both endearing, it's very telling, and it also raises a big message. It's very dark as well. There's all sorts of emotions that you can take from that little segment, and I think it was very well written. And seeing Tobias's reaction to learning about the Hawkbajir was very important for the series going ahead. What have we got to look forward to in Cycle 4? Well, we've got books 16 to 20, of course. It will end with the first part of the David trilogy. I was thinking of making that its own separate video, but I'm going to keep this series consistent. I'm going through, when I say cycles, it's character cycles. So you start with Jake, you end with Marco. You go through cycles. You know how these bloody videos work. We've also got Megamorph 2 to come up in the Time of Dinosaurs, which has had mixed reviews, and I've heard it's quite similar to Megamorph 1, which I didn't rate very high. So we've got that to look forward to. What am the David book, book 20, is another Marco one, and I reckon that's going to be a high scorer. Could be wrong. I've been wrong before. And there's another load of books that I think will be quite good. I think we've got a good cycle coming up next. But this one, average 7.8, unless you count that one. A pretty good cycle. Not as good as the previous two, but still, happy with it. A few good reads in this one. So, next video, I'll be starting Cycle 4, and we start with The Warning. Another Jake book. If you like reading Animorphs, I've written fan fiction. This is number 55. Go check that out. There's a link in the description to this video. Thank you very much for watching. This has been the Animorphs YouTube channel, and I'll see you soon. Goodbye.